When you venture hundreds of feet below the Earth's surface, you leave human intuition behind, entering an environment governed by rigid, unforgiving physical laws. Here, the very geometry of the Earth restricts your movement, your vision, and your margins for survival. Subterranean fatalities represent a terminal point of compounding systems failures, a cascade of errors across specific operational vectors. To understand how these environments turn lethal, we rely on the Subterranean Triad of Failure. This analytical matrix categorizes breakdowns into three pillars: environmental volatility, technical breakdown, and biomechanical entrapment. The first factor, environmental volatility, dictates how a static geological space can transform into a death trap through microscopic shifts in atmosphere or sudden changes in hydrology. The second vector is technical breakdown. In zero visibility environments, procedural discipline is the only tether to the surface. When human error severs that tether, physiological deterioration accelerates rapidly. Finally, biomechanical entrapment occurs when the dimensions of the human skeleton clash with the rigid geometry of the rock, turning the explorer's own anatomy into a permanent locking mechanism. Because post-incident extraction is mathematically and geometrically impossible in many of these bottlenecks, reacting to a crisis is not a viable strategy. Survival depends entirely on preemptive procedural discipline. Let's begin with the environment itself and one of the most fatal misconceptions in cave exploration: the belief that subterranean air pockets offer a safe refuge. In the year 2000, elite scuba diver Paul Hayden explored a submerged shaft in California's Goss Canyon. Reaching an underwater cavern, he removed his regulator to breathe from an air pocket trapped against the ceiling. It was a fatal miscalculation. This diagram illustrates why. Subterranean air pockets do not circulate fresh oxygen. Instead, they act as sumps for decay gases from surrounding soil and water-eroded stone. Heavy, toxic compounds like carbon dioxide pool in these enclosed domes, entirely displacing the breathable oxygen. Standard procedure dictates testing the air quality with an open flame, like a lighter, before breathing. Hayden bypassed this check. He inhaled a concentrated cocktail of CO2, causing immediate hypoxia. He passed out instantly and drowned within minutes. While invisible gases pose an acute, localized threat, macroscopic changes in hydrology can weaponize the entire cave system. The 1967 Mosdale Caverns disaster in England provides a textbook baseline for delayed subterranean flooding. A cave's internal conditions are dictated by its exterior watershed. When John Ogden and his 5 companions entered Mosdale Caverns, they were unaware that a heavy rainstorm was developing above. The benign exterior terrain was quickly collecting massive volumes of water, channeling it directly toward the cave's entrance. In an open field, a flash flood disperses, but in a subterranean environment, thousands of gallons of surface water exponentially compress into narrow rock choke points. The creek transformed into a violent, rapidly rising torrent, trapping Ogden in a narrow fissure where he eventually succumbed to exhaustion and exposure. Environmental variables, whether they are invisible pockets of carbon dioxide or rainstorms miles away, act dynamically upon the static space of a cave. By the time an explorer perceives the threat, standard reactionary survival instincts are already obsolete. Even operators with elite training are rapidly neutralized by these environments if they abandon strict procedural adherence. In zero visibility diving, the buddy system and the continuous guideline are non-negotiable. In 2016, 2 highly experienced technical divers, Mike Young and Shane Thompson, attempted to map the deeper sections of the Santa Rosa Blue Hole, a site notorious for its complex, restrictive topography. Operating at a depth of 165 feet requires advanced life support equipment, specifically back-mounted rebreathers. While highly efficient, this gear adds a bulky profile to the diver, making navigation through tight rock crevices incredibly precise and unforgiving. The dive plan dictated that Thompson wait while Young navigated a severe restriction solo. But Thompson deviated from the plan, following his partner into the dark. Squeezing through a silt-filled 3-foot opening, Thompson's rebreather snagged on a protruding rock. He was stuck. Young managed to back up and free Thompson, But in the frantic struggle in zero visibility, their continuous guideline, the only navigational link to the surface, was physically knocked out of place and lost. Without a visual reference or a physical line, extreme psychological panic takes over. Thompson bolted forward blindly, tangling himself, tearing his suit, and becoming wedged in dead-end crevices. These erratic movements are the fatal symptom of a physiological cascade. This chart shows the Hypoxia-Panic feedback loop. As panic sets in, the diver's heart rate skyrockets, exponentially increasing their oxygen demand. This rapid depletion of the remaining air supply further intensifies the feeling of suffocation, driving the panic even higher in an inescapable cycle. The physiological pain of this cycle can cause extreme psychological breaks. In 2002, a diver lost in the Croatian underwater cave exhausted his oxygen supply. Facing the unbearable physical agony of suffocation, he used his dive knife to inflict a fatal wound to his own chest, ending his suffering before drowning could. The only mechanism to break this loop is strict air conservation. The diver must immediately cease movement, lower their heart rate, and maintain perfect buoyancy to maximize their remaining gas supply while awaiting rescue. In restricted, zero-visibility environments, deviations from standard operating procedures trigger a fatal psychological and physiological cascade, exhausting life support long before starvation or exposure can occur. Clinical. This brings us to the final and most physically absolute vector of failure, biomechanical entrapment. This occurs when the human body itself becomes the mechanism that permanently blocks extraction. Even in wider caves, rescues are severely hindered by geometry. During the 1985 Culverson Creek incident, a caver's head was pinned by a shifting boulder. Rescue squads struggled to deploy basic hydraulic jacks because the angular, unstable terrain of the cave floor offered no reliable leverage points. But when the entrapment happens in a severe vertical restriction, extraction becomes nearly impossible. In 2009, 26-year-old John Jones entered an unmapped 18 by 10-inch passage in Utah's Nutty Putty Cave, later identified as a dead-end vertical drop-off, an area known as Bob's Push. Wedged upside down, Jones became subject to what engineers call a one-way biomechanical valve. In an 18-inch inverted crevice, the human chest cavity compresses when you exhale and expands when you inhale. Working in tandem with gravity, every time Jones exhaled, his body slipped a fraction of an inch deeper into the funnel. Then, upon his next breath, the expanding chest cavity locked the bone structure tighter against the rigid rock walls. Search and rescue teams quickly realized that manual extraction was impossible. They attempted to use pneumatic drills to widen the passage, but the extreme hardness of the stone, combined with a lack of workable angles in the narrow shaft, yielded only minimal progress over many hours. The primary remaining option was to set up a complex rope and pulley system, the standard protocol for hoisting immense weight out of vertical gravity-fed drops. However, a pulley system is designed for straight vertical lifts. Inside Nutty Putty's twisting architecture, the rescue ropes had to wind around multiple jagged corners. Each bend created an extreme friction point, acting as a massive multiplier of force against the rope. As 8 rescuers pulled in unison, the cumulative resistance across these multi-point friction vectors exceeded the tensile strength of the gear. The anchor point shattered, the rope snapped, and Jones slipped permanently back into the crevice. Even with a steady air supply, inverted suspension forces the heart to pump blood against gravity constantly. After 27 hours in this highly compromised physiological state, Jones suffered cardiac failure. This tragedy proves a grim reality of subterranean exploration. When severe biomechanical entrapment occurs in an angular rock geometry, standard physical extraction tools are rendered mathematically ineffective by the architecture of the cave itself. Surviving the subterranean environment requires an absolute mastery of the Subterranean Triad. An explorer must monitor environmental chemistry, execute strict procedural protocols, and maintain precise biomechanical spatial awareness. The idea of a guaranteed rescue is an illusion. Search and rescue personnel operate under the same rigid geometric limitations as the victims. Delivering massive amounts of hardware and manpower into a bottleneck is often physically impossible. The only true safeguards are preemptive procedural checkpoints. adhering to turnaround gas crushers, verifying continuous guidelines, checking air quality, and understanding physical geometry. Passing every checkpoint is mandatory. A failure at any node dictates an immediate, non-negotiable abort of the mission. For technical operators, true mastery of the deep isn't about having the sheer endurance to push further into the unknown. It is defined by having the discipline to turn back. In extreme confined spaces governed by unyielding physical laws, survival is a precise engineering problem where the margin for error is zero.